Welcome to the #1 podcast covering Michigan State basketball. The Final Four is not in the schedule. Join Rod and me, Eric, as we dive deep into the Spartans to get you prepared for every game. Subscribe today for in-depth recruiting updates and fantastic interviews with today's important college basketball personalities like Robbie Hummel.
Thanks for having me. I have listened to your guys' podcast numerous times on drives throughout any Midwestern Big Ten city. So I am big fans of your guys' work.
Jay Billis.
And next time, hey, if anybody in Michigan wants a December tea time, call me. You wimps won't show up, but I'll be there. I'll be there and play in the cold. And Izzo will be in front of the fire with hot chocolate.
Coaches Thomas Kelly.
No problem. Glad to be back, man. Glad to be back.
Mike Garland.
Just can't sit there and trade twos for threes. You can't do it. You're gonna lose. Coming down the stretch, you're gonna lose.
And more. You won't find better coverage of Spartan hoops than you will get here. For both the casual and hardcore fan, come along as we take you for a green and white ride. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod here to talk about MSU's exhibition trip through Spain, where they're facing 3 teams of pro and semi-pro players. We're recording this episode after the second game to give you our thoughts on the first 2, and really we feel we saw enough to get a pretty good analysis of what we can expect and sort of like what sort of big takeaways there are from the team so far. And then we're going to get this done, and then we'll begin our grueling 2 weeks through the Big Ten. That's all 18 teams beginning next week. And so you can look forward to those on your podcast player. Before we begin, I just want to remind everybody that you can check out our page for supporters. There are ways to support the show, either through one-time or a recurring basis at the support page at tffinots.com/support. We appreciate anything you guys can send along our way. Helps keep us on the air. So this has been a trip that you can do, I think, once every 4 years, I believe. You're allowed to go overseas.
That's right.
To play exhibition games. And it's been 6 years since Michigan State did it. And I know they thought about doing it last year, but with this veteran team.
No, not 9 years.
Oh, it's been 9 years.
The last time was 2015.
Oh, okay. So a long time.
Yep. It was Denzel before Denzel's senior year.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I know, because I know I've seen Izzo mention that he was thinking about doing it last year, but of course, he didn't think he needed to, or that he was going to get much out of the trip. Especially, I'm sure, looking to the future, thinking it'll be worth more the following year with a brand new point guard, knowing that A.J. Hoggard would be moving on.
Right.
So here Michigan State was. They've played 2, as we're recording this, they played 2 games. This is going to drop maybe after the third game. We've definitely learned some things from the play, because the first time we've had, aside from just the brief Instagram or Twitter, the feed, the videos for 30 seconds or whatever, we actually got to see the team in action playing as an actual team. And of course the caveats are, it is an exhibition game, so their lineups are weird. They are whole line changes. I mean, it's not like the way they'll actually play the game. The minute distribution is not going to be what it will be during the regular season for sure, because it was pretty evenly distributed. I know Graham Couch had mentioned on his podcast, he said, well, you have to be careful with these games. You want to make sure you don't have someone, because people could still leave. Now they can't go anywhere else. You can't enter the transfer portal. Now he does not think that would happen at this team, but there's certain other places that if guys suddenly realize they're on the outs already, before the season starts, it could cause some problems. And I don't think that's the case here, obviously, Michigan State, but it's a consideration for coaches.
I think that I wouldn't completely dismiss that, but on the other hand, I would say to him that they would have approached it exactly the same way 10 years ago. The purpose,
I think so.
Of these trips and playing these games is a couple things. Well, multiple things, actually. It's first and foremost, I think it's to give them an educational opportunity, see another country in some level of detail, have a bonding experience as a team. And then the on-the-court stuff, it's giving Izzo the opportunity to try different things against somebody other than Michigan State, and also giving guys opportunities in real game action, which can hopefully lead to development. So that last part especially, but also the bit about trying different combinations, that's always going to lead to a coach wanting to experiment and to go deep into the bench and give everybody an opportunity. That's that. On the other hand, though, that only goes so far, because Nick Sanders is on this trip, as the only non-scholarship player. And I don't believe he saw the floor in the game against Madrid. He had a couple stints in the game that was played today as we're recording this against Valencia. But so even that only goes so far.
Yeah. And I don't know if maybe his dad was in attendance today, or that was sort of the plan that he was going to play one of the games. And maybe they knew this team wasn't as good.
I think it was
opponents in Valencia.
I would think it's as simple as the working margin. They don't want to lose.
Yeah.
So that's not the most important thing, but they don't want to lose these games. So they were in a tight game, which we're going to talk about, against Madrid. That game never really got to a comfortable place. The game today against Valencia was a very different affair. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess we can just go maybe in order for the games, and that might be the best way to sort of kind of work our way through them. I think we definitely learned some things. And as we mentioned, we're recording this on Sunday night because, got to work around our schedules too. And unless something really crazy happens on Tuesday, I think we've probably learned enough to get some basic ideas of sort of what this team is looking forward. We'll certainly go farther into depth for our season preview in a couple months, probably in October, as we get right about to game time. So this will be sort of our teaser, sort of what we've learned so far for the team. Before we begin, I just want to remind you to check out the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. If you need your windows cleaned, there's no better team to do that. Also, they do clean your house, and it's that time of year when it's kind of, you've had the dust and you've had some rain. It's a good time to get everything cleaned up before winter comes, which is sadly around the corner. But that, of course, it means basketball's around the corner too. So you can check out the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. They have a very big region in the Grand Rapids area. Even if you're as far east as Lansing, they took care of the state capital, so they probably can come out and take care of your gutters as well, or your windows as well. You can contact them. You get 15% off if you mention Final Four when you're getting your estimate. You can check that out at the support page at the Final Fours on the schedule.com/support. And you won't regret it. They do fantastic work. So the first game, as you mentioned, against Madrid All-Stars, it's hard for us to have a good feel for exactly what the teams are and like who the players are. We certainly know the individual players, but the caliber of talent is hard to know exactly. But it was a close game. It was a game I think Beach State had a lead around 8 maybe at some point going into the third quarter, and then Madrid got kind of hot, hit a bunch of threes. They certainly had a lot of players who could hit threes. Like I feel like every player who was dangerous from outside in that game, which made them a little bit tougher to cover. Michigan State's ended up winning, I think it was 94, was maybe 90 or 91 or 89 or something like that. So it was a pretty close game. And I guess should you want to just go through separate players?
No, let's
the easiest way to get through things?
Let's just talk about this one a little bit, and we'll move on to Valencia, and then talk about players.
Okay. We can go through players after that. Maybe,
so the Madrid game obviously was very competitive. It really went down to the last couple minutes, and Michigan State actually had multiple pressure possessions where they needed to score to keep it, a 2 or 3 possession game. So there was actual game pressure. And as I said, Michigan State led for a lot of it, most of it, but it was never a really super comfortable lead. And, the challenge in these kind of things is always knowing what you're actually facing in the way of opposition, because these travel tour things in the summer vary wildly. And in fact, I'm not even going to call him a journalist because he's not that. There's a podcaster who actually hails from Lansing, but as a unfortunate example, and there are a few of these out there, the self-hating types, who is a Michigan supporter despite that background, who has an internet media presence, started playing the ridiculous game of comparing scores against, the team they faced was called the Madrid All-Stars. Well, that's a catch-all name. It doesn't mean even if somebody else played the Madrid All-Stars 2 weeks ago, it doesn't mean that they played the same guys. This
Right.
is more akin to pickup basketball. You have to understand, in an instance like this, for example, these are pros, but they're pros in their off season. So my assumption is it's basically like, hey, you want to get a run in? They may not, for all I know, they might not even know who's gonna actually be on the floor more than a day or two in advance. I don't know that, but the point is it varies wildly. So that particular person got publicly embarrassed on Twitter when they made that post by the guy who organized the game and put the roster together. And he pointed out, no, this is not the same roster. And in fact, we try to tailor them for the opponents. And we had a very good group against Michigan State. And it looked that way. Now, I did a little bit of digging based on what he said. The guy's name is Gerard, and I'm going to assume his last name is pronounced Soleil, S-O-L-E, with an accent. So Gerard Soleil, who's a journalist and again is the promoter of this event and actually organized the teams. So he knows what he's talking about in terms of the quality. Based on what he said, this was a group of players drawn from the third division of Spanish professional basketball. So, like, it's not the level that former Spartan Matt Costello is playing at. Matt Costello is playing in La Liga, which is the top level. I think Valencia may also be in Eurobasket, which is kind of, for those of you who follow soccer, it's kind of the European basketball equivalent of the Champions League. So as pro teams from different nations compete. So they're in two different competitions. But it's not that level. That level, I'm being quite honest, if they were playing a pro team or even a team of all-stars from that level, Michigan State would get spanked. They get beat probably pretty easily. This was the third level. And so to give it a little bit of context, I took a look at some stats and tried to find if there were any players I was familiar with who played at that level, and there was one. One of the top 5 scorers in that league last year was Brad Davison, everybody's favorite from Wisconsin. But I think that puts things in a little bit of context, right? That this is a league that's probably filled with a lot of guys who have the talent to have played at the high major level or at least the mid-major level, but they're also, in a lot of instances, way more experienced. You know, the guy, again, Soleil mentioned that the roster ranged from, their point guard, who I thought was really good, is 23, but they had multiple guys in their 30s. So Michigan State was playing against men, and it looked like that. They were, I thought, incredible in terms of their ball movement. You mentioned they were hitting everything they put up from 3. That's true, but those were wide open shots. And it was because that team really, that was a classic example of what people mean by European basketball, by Euro ball. It's using ball movement and passing to create shot opportunities, often from 3. And they cashed in on a lot of them. Now, Michigan State's team defense was, to put it frankly, terrible. Awful. But I'm not surprised by that because it's August and they have not, I'll guarantee you, they have not had the time or really have had even the possibility of locking in on team defensive concepts with this group at this time of the year. It just doesn't happen. I remember for years, people would moan about it, saying, why, even in years where Michigan State had the roster coming back from a really good defensive team, and then early in November, they'd have some trouble occasionally guarding anybody. How can this happen? These guys were great defensively last year. Well, it happens because it's like anything else. You don't practice it over an off season, and it's going to take a while for that to come back into the frame. I wasn't surprised that they struggled. And against a team that obviously could execute, maybe they shot a little bit over their heads in this game. That's entirely possible. But I was really impressed with what they did in terms of their passing. And that's the thing. I think what Michigan State got in that opponent was a veteran team, much more experienced than they are, physical, one that was very, very skilled, not as athletically gifted as Michigan State is, but they were able to make up for that with the way they executed. So I thought it was a really, really good test. And as I say, these things vary. Like as we saw on Sunday's game, you can face similarly constructed teams that are just a lot worse. I remember the last time Michigan State took this trip, they took it to Italy that year with Denzel and company. And they played, there must have been some type of European championship or qualification for FIBA World Championships or the Olympics going on, because I remember they played and they lost narrowly to the Georgian national team. Now, that's obviously not Atlanta, Georgia. That's Georgia, the former Soviet Union, Eastern European Georgia. But that was a team that had at least one NBA player on the roster. So it varies as to who you see, but what you don't typically see is the elite European-based basketball players in these kind of games. And Michigan State didn't, but instead what they saw was a team that talent-wise was probably a really good fit to play against. And, when you add in their maturity that they have, the maturity advantage, that's a stiff test. And they got challenged, but, managed to pull it out. And we can talk about what some of the individual players did.
We'll talk about that in a second too. Yeah, I mean, I think to your point too, it's pretty obvious. Like, it's easy to work on your offense in your game when you're by yourself, through the summer, but you can't work on team defense when there's no team.
Anybody who's ever played knows this. I'm not saying they haven't spent any time on it, but this is the reality. It just is. Yeah. Your defense is always going to be behind. On a team basis, your defense is always going to be behind your offense, I think, at this time of year. That's just how it is.
Yeah. And I got to imagine, too, although the offense probably suffers a little bit for not having familiar lineups and being used to each other, it's much more apparent in defense than it is on the offensive side of the ball.
Well, and especially facing this kind of opponent. Now, if they were facing, say, another college team and a team that was just really looking to, a lot of one-on-one stuff, athleticism based as opposed to really precise offense, the defense might have looked better. Those guys, if it's a situation where your individual defense can kind of win the day potentially, you might be okay at this time of year. But when you're facing that team, really, I can't say it enough, they moved the ball exceptionally well. And it exposed Michigan State. Like, guys were not sharp in terms of switching, locating and closing on shooters. They were terrible. They were day late and $1 short consistently. All that stuff happened, and that's all stuff that's going to take some time when practice begins in earnest in October. That takes some time. And usually, or oftentimes, they don't even have it fully nailed down until January. I mean, oftentimes it happens. Yeah, it happens that way. It takes a while. At least in Michigan State, that's often the case. We typically see, we always talk about, Tom Izzo teams improve over the course of the year. Oftentimes, that improvement comes most profoundly on the defensive end, in my opinion.
Yeah, so just going briefly through a couple of stats now, we do not have the benefit of having our opponent stats, so we just have Michigan State stats. 94 points, a little over 45% from the field overall, 56% from twos, 25%, 7 of 28 from three, 81% from line out of 13 of 16, 47 rebounds, so 17 offensive rebounds and 30 defensive rebounds, 3 blocks, 17 assists, 10 steals, 10 turnovers. So pretty good numbers. I mean, actually, I think the rebounding thing was pretty encouraging.
Yeah.
I guess I'd have to. Again, we don't know what the rebounding rate was for the Madrid. I don't remember them like dominating in any way. If anything, I think we should say it was much better on the boards than they were.
They were, and some guys in particular we want to show up really showed up. Jackson Kohler had 12 boards, 4 of them offensive, but 8 defensive rebounds. That's important because, if Jackson's got a weakness over his first 2 seasons as a rebounder, it's on the defensive end. People talk about him struggling as a rebounder. He's actually a pretty good offensive rebounder. He's shown that ability. So getting 4 offensive rebounds, and he followed it up, just so you know, with 3 in the second game. That part doesn't surprise me. But the defensive rebounding, 8 in that game, was impressive. Carson Cooper had 9 boards in that game against Madrid, and Book had 7. So those are guys you're happy to see that coming from. I think an important thing, and it's something that, we always try to beat the drum on certain things that we think are important at the outset of a year and keep hammering on them as they progress to see if they're actually getting better. And I've already picked out what's probably my leader in the clubhouse to be the big point of emphasis in our discussions, at least early on: 2-point shooting. Michigan State historically has been a pretty good 2-point shooting team. The last 4 years, basically the Cassius Winston, the post-Cassius era, they have been very, very bad. Last year is the best of those 4 years. They were barely above 50% from 2, and they were like middle of the pack nationally, like somewhere in the 140s or 150s. I looked at it the other day. I don't remember the exact number, but somewhere in there. Each of these 2 games in Spain, they shot over 57% from 2. That is a great step in the right direction. And there are specific guys that I think are, and they're doing that, by the way, without having landed some 7-foot monster who's going to be a post-up machine, right? They still don't have that.
Yeah, right.
I mean, Jackson maybe will give you some of that, but they don't have that guy you just dump the ball down to. So we'll talk in a little bit about how they're doing it and how I think they can continue to do it as they go through the season. But that, to me, is very, very important if you want this offense to take a step from pretty good, which is where it's been, to great again, to what we're used to seeing, with some frequency from Tom Izzo teams, where they've really got, elite or near elite offensive teams. The last few years, for the most part, they've shot very, very well as a group from 3. So that has not been the problem. It's been 2-point performance that's been lacking. And hopefully we're going to see improvement this year. But that was the number that jumped out at me the most in both games on a team base.
Yeah. And the very obvious thing is there are 2 things. One is there are 2 kinds of 2-point shots. Basically, you have your layups and dunks, and then anything outside of that, really. Right. And then you have obviously the threes, which is nothing related to that, except that if your 2-point percentage is not very good or not as good, you have to rely more on the threes, and you have to get more production that end to be effective.
And here's the problem. The problem is that would hold if Tom Izzo were a coach who reacted to this by saying, all right, we're just going to do everything we can to generate 3-point attempts, and we'll live with it that way. He's not. His teams, even though historically his teams generally shoot very well from 3 on a percentage basis, they are never very high in terms of attempts. It's just not how he operates. So that's why I'm saying, realistically, if you want this offense to step up a level from where they've been, which again is hardly a disaster area, but if you want to get better, it's got to come inside the arc. It has to. And I actually think this team has a great chance of doing that. Not just based on these 2 games. I thought it coming in, but these 2 games, you don't want to take too much out of it, but particularly the one against Madrid, against the better opponent, I saw some things that I really liked, and we'll talk about it when we get to the players.
Right. So we'll briefly talk about the game just in general at Valencia. Again, so these are players that we don't know. There are 5 players, I believe, that played in the previous
That's what
game
they
in
said.
Madrid, who
That's what they said.
flew down to Valencia
I
or
recognize some
I
of
don't
the
know, some
names
company.
that Kevin Poggle was
Yeah,
calling
I agree.
out.
Yeah. So yeah, and quick hats off to Kevin Pauga for doing such a good job as like a solo play-by-play guy, and
great.
Better than
I wasn't
he had a couple
thrilled with the late references to I will not name him, Michigan State's radio announcer. I am not a fan of, but I guess it was funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, he did a great job. And the best move he made, I want to call out the best move he made over the entirety of the two games. They weren't thinking clearly, and the first quarter of the Madrid game, they had comments on. This was an IG live feed.
Instagram Live, yeah.
And it was as good as you'd expect. If you want to, if you really get in a mood where you want to despair for the state of humanity, go to either a newspaper comment section, although a lot of those don't really exist anymore, but go there or go to the comments in an internet or an Instagram live feed. And boy, it lived down to that. And there were a lot of ex-players on the feed, and there were people basically trashing those players.
Yeah.
AJ Hoggard was one, for example. And, I've been critical of AJ Hoggard, but I'm never going to sit there on a feed that I know he's on, or even if he wasn't on, and be talking about him negatively. I mean, come on. But anyway, that was a great move. He went out of the feed, so we'll be back in a minute. Started it back up. Second quarter, comments off. Beautiful.
Yeah. And he forgot, I think, the third quarter, because he they're on again for just briefly, and then he turned them off.
Yeah.
And also his great line where he said, that that he did as well as he could as the best color man,
Yeah.
So anyway, the game against Valencia, as we mentioned, not nearly as competitive. I think they won by 50.
Yeah, close to that.
Was the final score was like 105 to 57 or 59 or something like that. I don't remember it was. I think a couple of things. I do think Michigan State played better. They played better defensively, at least getting in passing lanes and pressuring, which is a little bit unusual. You don't usually see them do that as much, but I think they just look like they knew what they're doing more. I mean, there's definitely was some passes by the Valencia that got some open shots, but they had a lot of really bad passes too. And maybe you can contribute some of that to Michigan State, pressuring the ball a little bit more, making it a little harder passes, but they had some behind the back passes that like win the backcourt. And I mean, the errors that you wouldn't expect pros or semi-pros to be making.
Yeah. It was a different group, and you mentioned there were 5 guys that carried over, but we have no way of assessing, what the impact or import of the 5 guys that carried over in this one was. It was, to my eyes, it was clearly a clear step or 2 down from what they saw in Madrid. That's just the bottom line. Was Michigan State better defensively in this game? Yeah, probably. Look, anytime you get 20 steals as a team, you've gotten in passing lanes, you've had active hands. Great. But let's not kid ourselves. This team presented absolutely zero off the dribble threat. If you thought there was an athleticism gap in the Madrid game, there was a massive one in this game. And so that makes it a lot easier. One thing that I think is worth noting, and I didn't notice it as much in this game. I may have missed it, but I definitely saw it in the Madrid game. We know how Michigan State historically tends to play pick and roll defense. They are what's often referred to as a hard hedge team, usually, meaning that the big man will go hard and extend out, trying to contain the ball handler. So he's not in drop coverage, where you'll see a lot of less mobile big guys around the country will just all the pick. They're still staying parked in the lane. They're not coming up. And so they're essentially giving the ball handler an open look from, 3 or a long 2 if they want to take it. Michigan State does not play that way. But on the other hand, Michigan State is not typically an ultra aggressive team. you will see teams that will try to trap the ball handler. So both defenders go to the ball handler, go hard, try and trap him. Michigan State does not typically do that, but I saw them do that on occasion against Madrid. Now, I tend to think that's just an example of the kind of things that Izzo wants to experiment with on a trip like this. It doesn't convince me that they're going to change up the way they play ball screen defense, but is it possible that it might be something to put in the back pocket to think about come November? Yeah, maybe, just because it's not anything that's historically Michigan State. But overall, I didn't take a lot away from the quote-unquote improved defense in this game, because that team had zero athletic ability to punish you with. And then, as you noted, their passing was casual, to say the least. And they just didn't hit shots the way the team in Madrid did. So you total it all up, there just wasn't a lot of challenge there. So not a lot to take away defensively, in my view. Offense,
right? And so if you look at
go ahead.
Oh, I just go through the stats. Yeah, and you'll have to forgive me, dear listeners, as I'm translating from Spanish. But it looks like the shooting percentage was 48.3% from the floor. They shot twos at 57%, as you mentioned before, Rod. And then they were 34% from three, 12 for 35. They were only 58% from the line, 7 for 12. A lot of rebounds. They had 55 rebounds, 22 of them offensive.
Yeah.
So the last game they had a 39% offensive rebounding rate. This is what they were 22 for. How many misses do they have?
40.
For 46.
Almost 50%.
So that's almost 50%.
Yes.
Yeah, it's 40-some percent.
Yeah, they were
they
were
had
dominant.
28 assists. Yeah, 20 assists. Maybe 13 turnovers.
Yep.
I think that's what
Correct.
turnovers. And then some other things that aren't important. But finished with 105 points. I mean, Nick Sanders played a couple minutes, a couple stints, and had a 3 in the end. So not really much resistance, but definitely a fun game to watch too. So before we talk about, I guess, the individual players, we'll just mention it brief. You want to check out the Nudge Printing. They provide all our gifts for our competitions. So also they may have fantastic apparel. It is, I think the first game this season for football is, what do they call it? Stripe the stadium or something like that. And so you better make sure you have your green or your white. If you don't, no better place to go than Nudge Printing to pick out your t-shirt. You can have really cool vintage shirts. So you can head on over to Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. You also, as a listener to the show, get 20% off your purchase if you just type in Final Four as one word into the coupon code at checkout. They've got so much stuff there, super comfortable. If it gets a little colder later in the season, you can get some hoodies. Also kinds of cool vintage stuff for basketball as well, and just the regular logos. And they have, Gabe now has a deal where he's got some new hats that are going to drop. They're super cool. They're custom. They're not like the ones you get at the student bookstore or wherever. I mean, these are super cool. They got like camo state stuff on the inside bill. And you want to check it out. I don't know if they're released yet, but they're coming soon. So keep checking back at the Nudge Printing site. If you're not on their mailing list, make sure you get on there. So again, 20% off. You type in Final Four at checkout. So let's just go through the players, I guess. And we can just talk about through the 2 days, and we'll just go by numbers just because it's simplest. So we'll start with Jackson Kohler. Jackson Kohler obviously last year struggled because of his broken foot, got back in January or so. I mean, I think, and then was never quite what we thought he was going to be. His big problem has been throughout his career at Michigan State, as short as it was, just for 2 years, is finishing. Great footwork, not able to finish. You mentioned he's been a good offensive rebounder. Defensively, he's had a little bit more problems. He had 12 rebounds the first game. This second game, he only had 3, but they're all offensive. He scored 10 points. I think he had 11 points the first game. He had a 3 this game. And I thought most of the time he played today, now again, it was against this inferior team, he played the 4. I think he was playing off. He was not playing center most of the time and seemed to handle those guys at least okay, athletically.
Yeah, he did play a lot of 4. Look, I actually, defense was the one thing that I thought when he came back last year, I could see what the coaching staff had been talking about. That by getting his body toned, he allowed himself to make some strides defensively. And I think we actually saw that. There weren't as many just absolute blown tire kind of moments that we saw from him as a freshman where he really struggled. The problem has been, but at the same time, we know Jackson's never going to be a plus defender. That's just not in the equation. You can kind of, the most you can hope for is that, he gets somewhere into the Joey Hauser as a 5th-year guy realm where he's not going to hurt you. He's reliable to at least be solid, playable, however you want to phrase it. And so that's not going to change. He's not going to get a sudden injection of athleticism. He's not going to grow 5 inches, so he's a rim protector. Those things aren't going to happen. The big problem is, okay, knowing that, then what's the reason to play him? Well, the reason to play him is that he gives you something offensively that nobody else does. And with Jackson, his first 2 years have really been about some very occasional flashes, but mostly frustration around the fact that, as you mentioned, great footwork, will use that and his understanding to generate good shot opportunities and then just failing to hit them. What I've been very happy about these first 2 games is that we've seen him cash in on opportunities. In the game against Madrid, it was more work around the rim. He had a great N1 on a fadeaway baseline jumper, which was impressive. Did some good work around the basket. In this game, though, against Valencia, he finally stepped up and hit a couple threes. He was 2 for 4 from 3. And then the 1 2-point shot he hit was about a 15-footer right in the middle of the gap against the zone. So zone offense, which is 100% a role that Jackson, I think, could potentially help Michigan State in a bit this year. So I was really happy to see in both games for different reasons, focusing more on the second. If he's going to play the 4, I think you really want to see that he's giving you some ability to stretch a defense. And so seeing him actually, we've heard Izzo talking about it for 2 years, but we haven't seen it in games. We haven't seen him step up and hit a 3. I don't know if he's made a 3 in a Michigan State game thus far. He may have, but
I don't think so.
No. Seeing that today and seeing him look confident shooting those shots was really good. And then, as I mentioned, the shot against the zone was also impressive to me. So nice to see that coming along. And if that continues, I do buy that he could be a guy who could help them at both the 5 and the 4.
Yeah, I still think we're going to see him more at the 5 than the 4. But I think this is an opportunity to just play more players. You've got McCullough, you've got Booker and Cooper and Sapala and Kohler. So you got to find some way to put all 5 of those guys in the field somewhere.
Possibly
right?
so. And I also think some of it is going to depend upon what we see out of both Xavier Booker and Cohen Carr, because those are your other 2 candidates to play the 4. Frankie Fiddler some as well too. We saw that in the Madrid game. I don't know that we saw it today. So they've got multiple guys in there, and those guys will have a say in that too. But I do think Jackson is showing some of the skill sets necessary to do that.
Yeah. I really appreciate Kevin Pauga on his Instagram Live with his iPhone, but man, it is tough seeing those players, and especially them playing their black uniforms today in Valencia. It was really hard to know who's who out on the floor. So number 1, Jeremy Fears. So Fears back. I think we've talked before that it looked like all indications were that he was 100% or about as close to 100% as you can get. I've got, let's see, the numbers for Valencia. He was 2 for 5 from the field. He didn't attempt any threes. Had 7 assists, 2 turnovers. Had a 3 rebound defensive boards. So he finished with 4 points. And I think he had, and sort of as I scroll back and forth, and let's see, against Madrid, he had 10 points. He was 5 of 6 from the field. 0 for 1 from the 3. So he's 5 for 5 from 2, which is, I think, where you're going to go with as far as their 2-point percentage being better. Had a couple boards, 6 assists, 2 turnovers, a couple steals in the Madrid game.
Yeah, second game first, I thought against Valencia, he was, it'll be interesting to see, because there are a couple guys I have this theory about, that they may be guys that you need to get in rhythm early. I just thought he was never quite as comfortable as we saw, and I'll talk about Madrid in a second, where I thought he was fantastic. He wasn't fantastic against Valencia. Thankfully, they didn't need him to be, because other guys stepped up. But at the end of the day, even in a day where I thought he was uncharacteristically loose with the ball, he had 4 turnovers, he still had 7 assists. So, that surprised me a little bit when I looked up and said, wow, he still did some things, even in a day that was just kind of by his standards, or what I think we expect him to be. The Madrid game was outstanding. He had, as you mentioned, 6 assists, 2 turnovers. I thought the transition game against Madrid was by far at its best when Jeremy was running the show. He looked great.
Yes.
Today, it was a little better from guys like Trey, so it didn't stand out as much. There wasn't as much of a drop-off. But against Madrid, there was a big difference. And that's what it was like last year in those 10 games or so that he played, right? We spent time talking about it, how much better the transition game looked when Jeremy Fears was out there. And it looks like it's going to be the same thing this year, except we're going to see him, in my opinion, playing far more minutes, which means Michigan State's transition game should be much better, because he's going to be the guy. I was really impressed with him, though, in addition to all that stuff, looking for his own offense against Madrid. You mentioned he was 5 for 5 from the floor, and 2 huge shots late. When they were trying to put that game away, 2 guys, and Jeremy Fears was one of them, the other was Frankie Fiddler, were the guys they went to down the stretch to put that game away. And Jeremy Fears just made plays. He is a guy, I'm not expecting him to be a major league 3-point threat. I think he can be decent there, but I don't expect 40% or anything like that from him. But I don't think he has to be. I think he is so good at getting to the rim. He is sneakily explosive athletically, and he's one of those guys. Some guys are, some guys aren't, who just has a knack for finishing in traffic as a smaller player. For example, Cassius Winston had a knack for it. A.J. Hoggard, Jeremy Fears is in the Cassius Winston category. He can finish plays. He's also really good at finding himself little mid-range opportunities, like in the middle of the lane. You'll see him do that sometimes. And he did that some when he played at Michigan State last year. So really, really happy with him. And remember, he's coming off a lot of time out. These are really if you don't count Moneyball, these are the first competitive games he's played in since December. So it's before Christmas.
Right.
So it's a big, big deal. And to see him looking this good, I think the biggest thing is that you don't, at least to my eyes, I don't see anything physically that's off. He looks like he looks exactly as you'd hope and expect him to. But I think it's more than that. And to me, the number one potential difference with this team, as opposed to the last few years, revolves around him being its point guard. That doesn't mean I expect him to be their best player, but he's their most important player, to me, in my opinion. He absolutely is. And he's one of the guys, both by virtue of the way he can finish and the way he creates for others, who I think can have a big impact on improving that 2-point shooting that I mentioned. We talked about the Madrid game, 5 for 5 from the floor. Doesn't get better than that. And he's creating opportunities for others inside as well. So very, very happy with him.
Yeah, and I feel like at least 1 or maybe 2 of those drives against the Madrid game, they should have been end ones, but
yes,
whatever.
You're absolutely right. There were some.
So it was like real contact,
yes,
and these are big,
100%,
bigger guys.
100%. Yep. But that's the thing. That's the other thing that we've had a lack of the last few years, finishing through contact, converting a play where
right.
you draw contact, because they might swallow the whistle. And even if we don't, and you get yourself an and one opportunity, that can be a big difference maker at that spot from what we've had of late.
Yeah, that was always the thing. We're just puzzled that AJ with his size was not able to finish as much as he should have. And of course Tyson was just small, and he could get around, he could avoid contact really. I mean, he's very creative, but he couldn't go through contact great because he's so small.
But Tyson actually finished pretty well, I thought, last year. The 2 years prior to that,
he's much better. But even still with contact, he's still, those guys are so much bigger.
That's the thing. I mean, you could talk about strength, which AJ had, and that's necessary, but not sufficient for being a great finisher. Yes, you need some strength. I mean, I remember Travis Trice struggled mightily from 2 up until his senior year because he never had a healthy off season. He never had an opportunity to really work on his body. And then when he finally did before that last year, big surprise. All of a sudden, he's finishing a lot better. So for a lot of guys, it's that simple. And AJ's pretty well put to, Jeremy is pretty well put together, so that it's not surprising, but it's more than just strength. You've also got to just have that knack for it. And AJ, despite his physical gifts in that way, never did. Jeremy Fierce clearly does.
Yeah. All right, so moving on to number 2, Kurtang. He was against Valencia. He was 3 for 7 for 43%, 1 for 4 from 2, 2 for 3 from 3. He had split a pair of free throws, had 4 rebounds, 3 offensive rebounds, and then for finishing with 9 points. And I think he did less against Madrid.
He did. He had 4 points.
He had 4 points. Yeah, one for 2 from 2 point, and then he was 0 for 2 from 3 in that game with a couple of free throws and 3 boards. He didn't play nearly as much, I feel like, in that first matchup.
No. Again, they were in a little different mode. They were still trying to play everybody, but they were in more of a let's win mode as that game rolled on, whereas Valencia was a laugher. I really liked him. I thought that he more or less looked as advertised. Defensively, I thought he looked like he held up okay, and that's the expectation. Physically, he looks ready to go. And, over 2 games, he's 2 for 5 from 3, 40%. That's what you would expect from a guy who has a reputation as a good shooter. And so we'll see how it goes, but I'll put it this way. Nothing I saw changes my expectation that Kurtang is going to play minutes on this team. I think he's too good and too ready not to. Now, how big the role remains to be seen, but he's going to have a role.
So then move on to everyone's favorite, who I feel like is going to be the whipping boy maybe this year on the Spartan Mag board and sort of social media. Sure feels like it might be.
Depends on how he plays.
Yeah. So Jaden Akins, El Capitan, had a very forgettable first game against Madrid finished with 1 point. He was 0 for 5 from the field, from the twos. He was 0 for 6 from 3. Had just 1 free throw, 4 rebounds, 2 of them offensive, had an assist and no turnovers. And then he was much better today against Valencia, where he finished, he was 5 for 10 from the field, he was 1 for 3 from 3, and had 3 rebounds, all defensive, and 5 assists to 1 turnover. So much better showing today, finished with 11 points. Still, and I guess the question with him is, we know he can shoot, and I suspect his shooting can be back to where he was, although probably would hope for a little bit more consistency than last year, but also then, how does he handle moving to that 2 spot and being able to create on his own?
Yeah, and look, I don't want to be a downer on this, but I just have to call it as I see it. I did not see in these 2 games evidence of what I've heard reputable people, Jim Comparoni being one, talking about based on practice and their observations, having seen him a bit this summer, that he had made progress with the ball in his hands. Michigan State, what's the importance of the 2? Primarily, what it means is that's another guard besides the point guard that you're going to put the ball in his hands and let him play through some pick and roll stuff. So think about last year's team. Tyson Walker was not usually the point guard, right?
Right.
But he was in that position a lot because he had the dribble, the athleticism, the shooting ability, the scorer's mentality to be effective with that. And this is what Jaden has wanted. It's why he almost transferred out a year before last, because they knew that stuff was going to rain on. Then there was talk about, well, they're going to try to give him more opportunities. And I thought they did that early last season. It clearly wasn't working. And so he went back to his previous role, which is primarily transition guy and spot up 3 shooter. I did not see evidence of improvement. These doesn't mean it's not there. Just haven't seen it in these 2 games. I was happy to see truthfully, his game against Madrid is the worst game I've ever seen Jaden Akins play. By far, by a long shot, not anything close. Because not only was he 0 for 11 from the floor, but his misses were awful.
Yeah.
They weren't, last year when he had that, I think he was like 1 for 11 or something to start the year from 3. But a lot of those where it was in and out. And you could tell this guy is just going through a bad streak. He just can't buy one. It wasn't, wow, what's going on? Madrid was what's going on. Those shots looked terrible. And I don't mean his form, that looks largely intact, but I just mean the results. Like, it was flat. Wasn't even giving himself a chance to make those. I liked what I saw for him against Valencia in the sense that early in that one, he had a few opportunities to get to the basket, and he took those. And so scoring, I think, got his confidence flowing. And in the second half, he did manage to hit a 3. And I think he hit a step back, too, maybe in there as well. A jumper. So that was good to see. But again, even on those buckets he had at the rim, those were easy. Those weren't plays where he was getting someone set up in a pick and roll and using that kind of screening action to get an opportunity or going through traffic. They were pretty much straight line, no pun intended since they're in Spain, matador defense. and he just had a straight line to the rim and he took it. That's great. I'm glad he, on a guy to recognize those chances and convert them, but it wasn't showing what we need to see. So it's still very much to be determined. Look, in terms of the jump shooting, I mentioned the Madrid game was horrible, but you just burned the tape, the mental tape on that one. We got a pretty good idea of where Jaden's going to finish in March. As you alluded to, I would like to see him be a little steadier. I felt last season was a real roller coaster with him shooting the ball. He would either be, 5 for 8 or 1 for 7.
Yeah.
You didn't have a lot of solid 2 for 5s in there. That wasn't happening. So I would like to see him be a little steadier, but by and large, I'm pretty confident when we look up in March, Jaden Akins' 3-point shooting percentage is going to be more or less where we figure it to be. High 30s to low 40s. That's what I would expect. The question, though, what would allow him to break through and be the guy that I think the coaching staff still believes he's capable of being, which is their alpha dog, their number one option offensively, that's going to require that he improve in some of these areas we just talked about. And we've got to see what happens. We haven't seen it yet in these 2 games, so that doesn't mean it's not there.
Yeah, I agree with your assessment, and it's just going to be, it's going to depend on which Jaden shows up here, and whether he can actually, I guess, there's plenty of talent in this, plenty of scoring on this team. You can definitely see it. So there's every reason to think that, he might not be starting the end of the season. Who knows, right? If he's unable to finish, and certainly for an NBA career with his size at 6'4", I mean, you've got to be able to use the handle to have any chance to getting, I imagine, in that position, which is why he came back, right?
I'd be surprised if he moved out of the starting lineup. But the main reason I think that is first of all, he's a veteran, but secondly, he's proven to be a very reliable defensive player.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And so like the 2 freshmen who would be threatening him realistically for a starting spot, they're not I love where they're at as freshmen, but I just don't see it. I think Jaden's going to be a starter. I think the question is, does he emerge as the number one option that Izzo talks about him potentially being, or do we kind of have a rerun of last year where they try some stuff with him off the dribble early, it doesn't really work, and then it kind of reverts to him in that transition and spot up shooter role, which, by the way, he's very effective at, and I'm okay. I know that's not the thing for the best thing for his future if he wants to be an NBA player, but from a Michigan State perspective, that would be okay.
Yeah.
I just don't think that's what he wants, and I think that Tom Izzo believes he's got more in him.
Yeah, well, we'll see, right? Next up would be Trey Holloman, number 5. Trey, I guess my impression was, looks like Trey from last year. I mean, I think very confident, veteran sort of player, steady, shooting threes, doesn't lack for confidence. He was not, he had 2 for 4 in the second game. He was, I think, not as good in the first game against Madrid.
1 for 6 in the first game. So he's at 30. He's at 30%.
Yeah. So, but runs the team well. I mean, runs the break really well. I mean, overall, the break moves faster with him and Jeremy run. I mean, obviously, than it did last year. So expect a lot more out of that. And defensively, he's very good.
He was much, much better in that regard against Valencia. I did not think he was great against Madrid pushing the ball. I think he needs to be better than he was against Madrid, but he was better against Valencia. It's a mindset thing. It really is. It's get the ball and go, and you don't even think about it. You're physically, it's just muscle memory. You're into it. And that's, I think Trey can still get a little better there, but overall, I agree with you. Did some really good things at times in both games. First game wasn't as dialed in from 3, but we know what Trey is as a shooter. I'm not worried about that. He's just going to be a great guy to have once again on this team as sort of the fourth guard. If you think about the 1, 2, and the 3 as the 3 guard spots, really, he's the fourth guy.
Yeah.
And that means he can come in and play point, or he can play off the ball. He can help you either way. And that's a huge advantage for Michigan State to have a guy like that, who's now, the other thing is, he's now a junior.
Yeah.
I mean, Trey's no longer this young guy you're hoping to get some things out of. He's a veteran who's done some things. So, yeah, I've been pretty happy with how he's looked, and I'd agree with you. For the most part, it's what you'd expect. He hasn't looked, by my eyes, to have taken a huge, huge leap to where like, oh, this guy's going to go out and score 25 a night. But he's a very good player that can be a very important part of Michigan State's group.
In a fact, that's only slightly interesting to someone like me. We have number 7, Garrick Norman, where players actually can be higher than number 5 now, starting, I think it was last year, the year before. So he is number 7. Anyway, so Garrick, redshirt freshman, he's 1 for 5 against Valencia, 1 for 4 from 3. I don't remember. I've got to pull up the stats. I don't think he was hit many shots against Madrid either.
He didn't. He was 0 for 1, and it was from 3.
Yeah, I mean, plays hard. He strikes me right now as the odd man out. I think, we'll see more from him in the future, and I don't think there's much more to say beyond that.
I will say this. You may feel the same way. I think we're a little biased here because we've had Garrick on the podcast
a couple times. Yeah.
We had him on twice.
Yeah, he's been on twice. Yeah, he's a great kid.
Yeah, and he is, and he's funny. Got a lot of personality. He seems to have exactly the kind of energy you want on your team, good teammate, all that stuff. So I find myself rooting for him for sure.
Yeah.
And I think he's got game. You hear stuff out of practice that he can be what they thought he was as a recruit, meaning he can fill it up. He can hit threes. The part about him that I think maybe gives him a chance going forward beyond that is he's also a pretty good athlete, so he can do some other things. That said, and it's only 2 exhibition games, it doesn't mean the world from this perspective. But you mentioned being on the outside looking in. If you look at Michigan State's guard group, even if you consider Cohen Carr 4, It gets worse if he's a 3. But if he's a 4 primarily, Michigan State is 6 deep at those 3 positions, right? So you've got Fierce, Eakins, Fiddler as your starters, and then Holloman. And I think, based on what I've seen and what I've heard, I think Richardson and Tang are the other 2 guys. And so Garrick would be number 7 in a group that's probably only got minutes for 6.
Yep.
So, look, he has identifiable skills that a team can use. I think for him, the key is going to be actually having that translate. So not just talking about being a shooter, but actually stepping. I'm glad he got one today. That gives him something to build on for his confidence. But he's got to be able to hit some shots. And then I think the other thing from him is he's got to prove able to defend.
Yep.
And that's that. If he can do that, that will enable him to have a chance to earn a role. If he doesn't do that, I think it's going to be tough.
Then we have senior transfer number 8, Frankie Fiddler. He had 14 points. He was 5 for 7 against Madrid. He is 5 for 6 from 2. He missed his 1 3-point attempt. Hit all 4 free throws. He had just 1 offensive rebound, 1 assist, 2 steals, no turnovers in the first game against Madrid. And then against Valencia, he was a little less productive. I don't feel like he played quite as much minutes. Certainly not much as much was asked of him, expected, I think, in that game either. He was 3 for 7, 1 for 3 from 3. 2 for 4 from 3. He had a split. He was 3 or 4 from the line, 3 rebounds, and 2 assists, no turnovers. So we finished with 11 points. But the one thing that Michigan State's been lacking is certainly at that spot is the ability to go and get your shot. And he was billed as a guy who can get it at all levels, could draw contact and score through contact. Well, I think as far the small sample size looks like that's probably accurate.
It's funny because a guy who had 14 and what was it today, 10 points,
11 or something, yeah.
Well, solid production, but not 11. That's right, but not oh my God, he went out and dropped 30. But I'm telling you, not only is he everything that he was advertised to be, in my opinion, but he's more than that. The Big Ten, and we're going to be talking about as we move through our Big Ten previews, has brought in a lot of transfers, of course, and there are some guys that are big names. Based on what I've seen, I think there's a chance that Frankie Fiddler could end up being the best transfer in this league. Certainly the one who's the most important to his team's success. Michigan State has not had a guy who plays the way he does in a long time. Maybe ever in terms of an exact comparison. But he's every bit of, 6'6", maybe even 6'7". And the way, as you pointed out, that he creates shot opportunities for himself is what separates him. And then the execution, like even today, he missed a couple shots. They still look good.
Yeah.
They were still good opportunities. They just didn't quite fall. In the first game, they fell. He had a play late in that Madrid game that, again, I can't think of the last Michigan State player I've seen make it. Fears got him the ball on the wing in the half court. And he used the dribble to get himself a little closer to the rim and then banged twice against the defender to create just enough space for him to get a fadeaway off, which was a bank shot that was good in a big moment. Michigan State was trying to hold Madrid off, and that was a huge, huge make. I can't tell you how impressed I was with that play. It was everything you want to see. It was maturity, recognizing a situation, recognizing what made sense for him to try and go to, and then the ability to just go out and execute it, make that shot. Classic stuff. I mean, it was a total pro move. Very, very impressed with what I've seen out of him thus far. And I think he's going to be everything they wanted at that spot. So I also think there's a reasonably good chance that he could end up as the number one scoring option on this team. I think he's got it in him. Again, the minutes, we can't take a lot away from the minute distributions in these games. I think Madrid was closer to the truth than what we saw against Valencia in terms of what we see in the regular season. But to me, he's a guy I don't want to see off the floor very much. I just think he gives them that size at that position really helps. We haven't seen him get tested yet defensively, not really tested. At the position he plays, he's going to have to deal with some guys that are superior athletes. And I'm interested to see that. But man, everything else, check, check, check. I could not be happier. I think he's going to, and this is to some extent a function of his experience. He's coming in a little more experienced. But, with Tyson and especially with Joey Hauser, the two recent transfers they've had, it took them a while, really a year, to fully adjust and get comfortable. I guess in Joey's case, 2 years.
Sure.
Frankie does not have that kind of time. He's got 1 year to play.
Yeah, right.
But what I'm seeing, he'll need it. He's hitting the ground running.
Yeah. The question would be the defense, and we won't really know that until the game starts.
Yeah. And he's,
for sure.
And by the way, he's the other component besides Fierce that gives me great hope that Michigan State's 2-point shooting is going to be much better this year. Because he's a guy, he took every shot he hit in that game against Madrid was a 2-pointer. They were all designed. Those were the shots he wanted to get. They weren't the Josh Langford half a foot inside the arc stuff. If he was shooting a mid-range jumper coming off a pin down, let's say, that's the shot that was designed to happen. And that's a big deal, to have a guy that wants to and can get those shots and then will make them.
Well, before we finish the lineup, I just want to briefly remind you that if you need someone to finish for you, the Brothers Who Just Do Gutters do a fantastic work. They take care of your gutters. If you have any water issues in your house or your business, they'll be the first ones you should call. They can replace things, they repair things, they can put in leaf guards, they can clean out all the leaves so you don't have to get up on the ladder, because everyone knows that stinks and that's how you fall and break your ankle and stuff. So call the Brothers Who Just Do Gutters to the pros that will take care of everything, whether you're on the west side or the east side of the state. They can do it all. They give you 10% off. You mentioned Final Four when you get your estimate. Please turn to them first if you're looking for gutter work for your house or business. You can find information for that at our support page, thefinalfoursonschedule.com/support. You can find a link for the estimate for either Greg on the east side or Kurt on the west side of the state. So next will be another transfer. The graduate student is Shimon Sapala, number 10. He had a pretty productive game. He had 10 points against Valencia, destroyed them on the boards. He had 6 offensive rebounds for a total of 7. He had an assist. He was 5 for 6 from the field. He actually attempted a 3, missed. That was his only miss besides miss a pair of free throws. And then against Madrid, he was not very productive at all. So I don't know. I mean, I think for what they were hoping was someone who can move. I guess the one thing I'd say about him is I thought he moved a lot better than I expected. I didn't expect him to be able to get up and down the court like a straight line as fast as he could.
Absolutely. That's the biggest takeaway I had from him as well, was that he didn't look out of place. I had thought when they got him, well, this is a guy who's there as insurance and to give them size and, maybe the occasional post-up bucket, but he's, it might be an issue defensively for him to play a lot of minutes, blah, blah, blah. His movement is a very pleasant surprise. And now having seen him, I could see why they were good with adding him.
Yeah.
Because if he's on the floor, it's not going to require that they adjust at all around him. It's like this guy's going to be able to play the way they want to play.
Right. He doesn't do drop coverage is what you mean. Defensively.
Yeah, absolutely. And he can also run the floor when Michigan State is getting into transition. He's not going to hold them up in that way either. I was very impressed the way he rebounded offensively today. And so that was good to see. And he converted some buckets around the rim. That was also good to see. Didn't do much against Madrid. You're right about that. I guess, I still think he's he's the third option likely among those fives, I think. But I'm also not going to be surprised to see him actually regularly get a turn or two. It may not be, even double-digit minutes, but I can see it.
Yeah, I could see him 8 minutes or something a game.
Well, here's the thing. He has this unique, he's right there with Cooper in terms of his physical size. He's probably not quite as mobile as Cooper is, but he's probably a better athlete than Kohler. I think that's possible in terms of the way he moves. He's not as skilled as Kohler, but he might be a little more skilled offensively than Coop. So he kind of sits in an interesting spot. I'm generalizing with those statements, but I think you're getting my point. Is I could see an argument that he sits in a little different spot than the other two guys, and so in a given situation, maybe you opt to go with him instead of one of the other two guys. But I'm not down. Having seen him play 2 games now, I'm not down on him being able to provide some help. I guess I still don't expect it to be huge minutes, but I'm confident he can do some good things in the right spots.
Yep. Number 11, Jace Richardson against Madrid. He had 6 points. He was 2 for 6 from the field. He was 2 for 4 from 3 and then missed his 2-point attempts in that game. And then that can't be right. 2 for 4, and he had 4 points. If 3-point. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong lines, I think.
He had 6 points against Madrid. There were 2 threes.
I'm looking at fouls. He had 4 fouls. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So I'm trying to scroll back and forth between these really small box words in my screen. Against Valencia, he was pretty good running the floor too. He finished with 9 points. He was 50% from the field, 4 for 4. He's 0 for 4 from 3. Had 3 rebounds, 1 offensive, 6 assists, and no turnovers. So I thought he looked really good and sharp against Valencia. Again, the competition was not what it was against Madrid.
He looked good in both games.
Yeah.
The game against Madrid, he hit 2 threes that looked very smooth. And, Jace's rep coming out of high school.
That's going to be hard to make.
I know. It'll happen more. This won't be the last one. Jace's rep was not as a knockdown shooter. He didn't have quite as good a reputation of shooting, regard to shooting, rather, as Kurt Tang. But, good shooter, maybe a little bit streaky. From what I've seen, I think even though he didn't hit a 3 today, he was 0 for 4 from 3. I think he's better than advertised. And I thought today's game, really good getting himself to the basket and finishing plays. He had a transition dunk, which was very impressive. And again, he's a guy, much like Jeremy Fears, I don't feel like he gets quite enough credit for his athleticism. He's a pretty damn good athlete, Not his dad, but not many are.
Well, he's not as tall as his dad either, right? I mean, he's like
6'2". But the most impressive thing to me about the Valencia game is that they played him a little more on the ball. And you mentioned 6 assists, 0 turnovers. And he looked comfortable. Now, he wasn't getting a huge test, let's be honest. But the fact that he looked comfortable running offense, creating for others, I saw him do it some in high school. He didn't get a chance to do it as much as he should have because the team he played with his senior year had the Boozer twins, and one of them is a point guard that for some reason everybody thinks is great. Every time I've seen him play, I thought he was garbage. But he got the majority of the turns at the point. And Jace would only play it sparingly, but he looked good every time I saw him do it. He's not a spectacular kind of player at the point, but it's good to know that if it gets down to it, Michigan State needs to use him for some oddball minutes, that I think he's fully capable of delivering a solid workman-like effort, which is really all they need from him there. And then I think off the ball, I think he's got a chance to be impactful.
Yeah.
As a freshman. I'm really impressed with him as well. He and Kerr both, I think he's been better of the two thus far.
I agree. Yeah. So then Carson Cooper, junior center, number 15. He against Valencia, he was 1 for 4 from the field. He had 5 rebounds, 2 of them offensive. Had just finished with 2 points. Against Madrid, he didn't do a whole lot either. I'm trying to remember if he had...
he did better than that.
Oh, he had 10 points
He had
against...
10 and 9.
So 10 points. He's
9.
4-6 from the field in that game. Again, so he had 9 rebounds that game with 3 offensive. So he's a little more impactful against Madrid.
Yeah, it was more or less the same Carson Cooper that we've seen. I did think the second half of the game against Madrid, he was pretty good. He ran the floor well. It's putbacks, had a rim run bucket, and he was a force on the boards. Today, didn't play quite as much. Only 14 minutes. They kind of shared those minutes fairly evenly. But still had 5 boards, 2 of them offensive. So, look, the deal is with Carson, what you know you're going to get is you're going to get solid to maybe even a little better than solid defense, and you're going to get rebounding.
Yep.
Those are the things you're going to get. What you don't have as much confidence in is the offensive end. So this is where I part ways with some of the fan base. You absolutely can win if you have a center who does the things well that Carson Cooper does well. Absolutely you can. The way you can do that is if you're getting enough offense from the other guys around him. And so all you need is to be able to say, look, this guy gives us solid defense, good defense, and he's an effective rebounder, that's enough. I know this because I've seen Michigan State teams win with that equation in the past.
Yeah.
This idea that you need a guy 15 and 10 every night is bull. You don't need that. You just don't. And so Carson's role and his effectiveness is to some extent going to be dependent on what happens around him.
Yeah.
And look, he's going to play, man. There's no way around it. How big his role is, whether he's starting, whether he's the first guy off the bench, whatever, that remains to be seen. But Carson Cooper's going to play, and he's going to play a decent amount of minutes, and I think he'll do some things to help this team. Would I like him to be better finishing? Yeah, I would. And I still hold out hope that he can get a little better there. But, at this stage, guys going into his junior year, you do start to, if the breakthrough doesn't happen soon, it's probably not happening.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean he can't be an important part of a very good team.
So then let's talk about the next player, number 34, Xavier Booker, who had a tale of 2 games here. Against Madrid, he was very good. 21 points, 8 of 11 from the field, 4 for 6 from 3, a couple of free throws. He had 7 rebounds, 2 offensive rebounds. And then against Valencia, he was, I'm not going to say no-show, but certainly he was far less impactful. He had, I think, 5 points maybe? Yeah, 5 points on just 1 for 4 from 3, had a 2-pointer, had 2 rebounds, and not as many minutes, only 13 and a half, 14 minutes, so a little bit less from a time in the game, but definitely did not seem quite as engaged, I guess, although he started the first game and didn't start the second.
Yeah, Michigan State started an entirely different lineup.
Yeah,
in
right.
those games.
To be clear,
He was against Madrid. The other thing is it was a tale of 2 halves because he had 19 points in the first half and 2 in the second.
Right.
So most of the damage, he's really had 1 insanely good half and then 3 where he didn't do as much. Now, I find this interesting. I have a media friend who actually spoke to Tom Izzo the night of the Madrid game, so after the game. And he was talking to him 1 a.m. local time in Madrid, and shockingly, Tom Izzo was spending his time not going out for a fashionably late dinner as they do in Spain, but instead watching video of the game earlier that day. And he mentioned 5 guys that he was happy with coming out of the Madrid game, and I'll see if I can get this right, was both Jackson and Carson, Jeremy, Cohen Carr, and
Fiddler.
Frankie. Yes, those were the 5. So he didn't name Xavier Booker. And you might say, well, who's the high scorer? And he had 7 boards. How can that be? I think, look, the standard is that Xavier Booker wants to be an NBA player, right? So that's the stance. And that's a very high bar. And Tom Izzo is going to keep that standard in place when it comes to Book. So I think in that first game, even though the point production was great, and I was really impressed with what I saw offensively, not just the threes. That stuff, I know he could shoot threes, but seeing him run the floor, seeing him on putback, he had a baseline fadeaway that was beautiful. He had a play where he faced up a defender and went off the dribble and scored. Did a lot of nice things, and the stuff inside the arc was more impressive to me than the stuff outside of it. But Book's got to defend. And everybody was bad in that first game. It wasn't just him. But he was really, really bad. Now, I thought he got a lot better as last year went on.
Yes.
To the point that down the stretch, I didn't worry so much about him defensively. He wasn't going to be perfect, but it wasn't what it was in December, where it was just a mess. He made progress. He's got to continue to make progress from there. And if he's playing the 4, as the plan seems to be, he's going to be challenged. I didn't like in that Madrid game seeing him not being able to get to shooters, because he's going to be tested in that way in the Big Ten. He's going to have guys try to square him up and go past him. He's got to be able to defend without fouling. There's a lot of challenges there, so I suspect that was part of it. And then I think as that game went on, you just kind of alluded to it in regard to the Valencia game, he maybe just wasn't quite as engaged. That's where the bar is going to be for Book. He can be the best player on this team. And there's a chance that he ends up being that at the end of the year, we look at it and say, well, he was leading scorer. He was right there in their rebounding stats. He gave him some shot blocking. He's their best player. Entirely possible. And, sometimes you don't know when that light of consistency is going to come on. He gets some comparisons to the kid that was at Indiana last year, Kelal Ware. And for Ware, was a lot of similar knocks. Tons of potential, got all this length, skill set, athleticism. It's all there. But he doesn't have a high motor. He doesn't play hard all the time. And it took until maybe about a third of the way through last season, his sophomore year, for Ware to really get that. And once he did, he was a menace and ended up, resulting in him being a first-round draft pick. So we'll see when that consistency comes on for Book. The first half of that Madrid game against good opposition shows you where the ceiling is. It's cathedral high for him. And that's not just a pun on where he played his high school basketball. It really is. Like, the sky's the limit for him in terms of what he can be as a player, but he's got to be able to reproduce that focus and that effort every time out. And we haven't seen that yet. We've seen the highs.
All right, so next to number 35, freshman Jesse McCullough. Against Madrid, he was zeros all the way across the board. And then against Valencia, he was 1 for 3, had actually attempted a 3, missed it, had 3 defensive rebounds in 12 and a half minutes of play.
I thought he looked okay. He didn't look out of place.
Yeah,
to me, which in the Madrid game, he didn't play very much because, again, they were trying, especially at a certain point, they were trying to win that thing. He got much more in the way of playing time in this second game, and I thought he looked pretty good. There were a few times seeing him in pick and roll defense. I thought he handled it really well. So remains to be seen. My expectations are that he's the odd man out in that big rotation.
Yeah.
Because you've got a lot of guys there, and especially having added Zapala, that that move made it very unlikely that Jesse was going to get any kind of real significant role as a true freshman. But I definitely think there's potential there. And remember, he told us the part of his game he feels the best about is his jump shooting.
Yeah.
We haven't seen that yet, but I know from watching him in AAU and high school a bit that he's got that. He could stretch the floor. So, yeah, low pressure with him right now. You just want to see development when he gets his chances.
Yep. And so finish out with a player who I think sort of affects his minutes, maybe McCullough a little bit. The thought that maybe he's going to move some players over the floor is Cohen Carr, who is a player who I think is going to increasingly, certainly if he plays like he did against Valencia, a player you're going to struggle to keep off the floor just because of all the sort of other things you can do. He was 10 for 11 from the field. He missed one dunk, which he hilariously did some push-ups, I guess, right afterwards in the timeout.
Yep.
Because he missed. He had one great play where he ran down a ball that was in the backcourt that Valencia just kind of think he was going to run out of bounds. He somehow tracked it down and then just had an uncontested dunk. He ran the break well. He played the most minutes against Valencia. Finished with 20 points. He had over 20 minutes. Against Madrid, he had 8 points. He was 4 for 6 from the field. Didn't attempt any threes. 6 rebounds, 4 of them offensive. 2 steals and assists. From a motor standpoint, if he keeps it going with his athleticism, he's going to hurt people. Obviously the knock against him is he's not going to be able to hit that outside jumper, and maybe that'll come at some point, whether it's this year or not. But that'll make him somewhat of a liability, I guess, at times on offense, and certainly his size. Trying to play the 4, if he's playing the 3, it's different consideration. But anyway, he is lethal running the break. There's no question about that.
I think the big difference from him that I've noticed thus far is, last year we obviously all saw the crazy athleticism, the ceilingless potential, all of that. But especially as the year wore on, and you hope it's the opposite. You hope that a freshman kind of grows into it. I didn't think that happened with Cohen. I think he showed flashes early, and then as the year went on, I thought he struggled more in terms of finding a fit, being comfortable. And if you're not comfortable, you're not going to be confident. It just seemed to me like he was thinking a lot as opposed to playing.
Mm-hmm.
And what we've seen over these 2 games is what happens when Cohen Carr just plays.
Yeah.
And it's because I think he feels comfortable. He was electric against Valencia. There's no other word for it. And he was really good. I mentioned he was one of the guys that Izzo called out and noted,
in Madrid,
should say, not called out. But yeah, out of the Madrid game, even though the numbers weren't quite as good as they were in the second game, Izzo still felt he played really well, and I agree. I think it's going to be interesting how he gets used, because I do think there is an argument for saying his best position is actually at the 4 rather than 3.
Yeah.
I do think that. But I'm not Tom Izzo, and Tom Izzo may have different thoughts on that. They tried to use him a lot as a 3 last year. And I just think at the 4, there may be an ability on his part to just kind of turn it loose and let his athleticism show through. And if he plays with the kind of energy we've seen thus far, he's absolutely going to impact games. There's no question about it. The rebounding is also really important to me, because that's something I felt was lacking last year. I thought his performance in that area of the game was well short of what his potential is. He's got a chance to be a back-breaking rebounder, especially on the offensive end. I know I made comparisons when they signed him to B.J. Dawson, and I still think that's in there for him. He can be that kind of player. I also think he has the potential to actually become a shooting threat, because I saw him do it in high school. I saw him hit threes. I think he's on the MSU big man program. I mentioned this on the Spartan Mag board. A guy like Matt Costello, who was at the game today because he plays for Valencia in La Liga, is a good example of this. I saw Matt Costello shoot and make threes in high school. You didn't see it at Michigan State for his first 3 seasons.
Yeah.
Goran Sutan was another guy. They kind of frequently, they will keep guys under wraps until they earn it. I don't know for sure whether that's going to be the deal with Cohen. He took one jumper that he banked in. It was not exactly the way you draw it up, but he hit it. As a free throw shooter, he has not been dynamite thus far in his career, but I do think he's got the potential to get better there. So he can actually have a broader, more well-rounded game than someone like BJ Dawson had. But I think that the strengths can be very similar. They should be, because Cohen's got, he's got a similar body type, maybe even a better athlete, which is crazy to say. He just has to play with the kind of energy we saw over these first 2 games. If he does that, he's going to produce.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. We went kind of long, but it's a lot of interesting things we saw at the games. I don't think you might be able to search. You might find people who made some Instagram recordings of these games, but I have no idea where they are. And that's not I'm not any good at finding that kind of stuff. So I think the next game is Tuesday, I think at 1:00, I'm guessing, in Instagram Live, if you want to try and catch that. And whether there's another game or not, we're not sure. But starting next week, we're going to begin our 2 weeks where we're going to grind our way through the Big Ten regular teams to get previews for all the 18 Big Ten teams, with our big finale with Michigan State at the end. We're going to be going in reverse order from 18 to 1. And so if you want to play along, you can enter a Beat Rod contest and see if you can do better than Rod in predicting the final standings of the Big Ten 1 through 18. You can send along your final standings to me, Eric, at tffinots.com. Also, as the tiebreaker is the amount of points Michigan State scores against Michigan, and they do play twice. So $100 gift certificate for the person who wins that from Nudge Printing, our friends over in Portland, Michigan. All right, so until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green.